I just popped one into the chat. This is the part where we need you to stop greeting each other and share your objectives. What is it that you want to get out of this? Might be tips for getting teachers to reflect more in a debrief from an observation. Making sure that the advice that you give is something that a teacher can easily follow through on. So share that in the chat. What's your objective? And while you're doing that, I'll share why I'm asking you to do this. You know, as I said, learning is always personal, but especially with adult learners, us, you, me, the DG, if you don't go into a learning experience with an objective, chances are you're not going to get much out of it. So we want to make sure you have an objective going into this. And it looks like we've got some things going on in the chat. Sorry, everyone. Time to stop introducing yourselves. I want to send a special shout out to Pajobi Abiodan, who said to understand the framework of a good lesson observation. Great. What else? What are some of the other objectives? And to be as specific as possible when you do this. No more introductions, folks. Thank you, Rashid Oyetoro, to learn improved lesson observation strategies. How do you want to improve your strategy for doing a lesson observation? I think like many of you, I've been both a teacher and a school leader and now a consultant. So, you know, you've had the experience, many of us have had the experience of being on all sides of a lesson observation. No more intros, folks. This is where you're setting objectives. Thank you, Olufemi. Okay, I really love what Oluwabunmi Awe has written. Learn how to objectively observe lessons. You know, you might, if you were in the last call, you might remember DG saying, you know, you need to have evidence for the judgments that you're making. You know, what is it that you're saying and why are you saying it? You may not like a person, but how can you be objective? Thank you, Mr. Ogonyemi. It's an exemplary answer. What is your objective today? Okay, we're going to move along, but please continue to add those objectives. You will find when we go back to the end of this, we want you to think about, you know, what you've learned in this session. And if you go in with a good objective, you're going to walk out with far more learning. So DG, I'm going to turn this one over to you. Why do we carry out lesson observations? We're busy people. Teachers are busy people. Why do we need to do this?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Christine. So why carry out lesson observations, right? It's really important to think about why it's being carried out, right? We don't want to just do things to just be seen as just fulfilling all righteousness and just ticking the box, because like Ms. Christine said, is what you put in that you'll get out. Right? So if we're carrying out lesson observations to just tick the box, then what we'll get in return is just a checklist of things that are done, but is it really impacting learning? Okay. We need to really think about how we're able to form objective judgments on how a teacher is doing in the classroom, not just so that we can help and support the teacher, but it's also helpful for the school leadership to know and to figure out ways in which they can support their teachers. They can figure out trends. So if they're noticing that the same teachers are facing the same type of challenges, it's something that they can address en masse. It's also useful because it's great to be able to share best practices, right? One thing that's very challenging sometimes in a Nigerian context is really not having examples of what good teaching looks like at times, right? So when evaluators are able to identify the different levels of teacher effectiveness, and we're able to capture this either in form of a video or whatever evidence artifacts we're requiring teachers to submit, then it's something we can then share. Oftentimes I found, even in thinking through today's lesson observation workshop, that we don't always have evidence of the different type of teaching levels done that's locally based, right? We normally have to look towards the US or the UK or something like that, but that's going to change by God's grace, right? So that's why we're having workshops like this, so we can begin the process of trying to capture what that looks like at different levels, and that you can relate to a particular teaching practice, okay? Apart from that, it's important that there's a culture of continuous assessment, right? And we know that, the principals, the TGPSs, the education family as a whole, public and private, you do have embedded professional development practices in a school. We want to help you to do this better, right? We believe that the Office of Education Quality Assurance is really giving strategic direction as to where we should be going regarding continuous improvement, right? But we also want to make sure that you are proffering your own solutions, right? DG all the way in Alausa, what does she know about what's going on in my classroom? So if you have the framework, then you're able to proffer those solutions at the school level, okay? And that is where we're going. Our desire as an office is to make sure that, yes, we're going out and we're doing whole school evaluation and we're doing all these external evaluations, but that you have your own system in place where this is constantly changing. You're constantly proffering solutions based on what you're noticing. Next slide. Okay. So the 5 steps to carrying out lesson observations, right? So we can all guess where we are now. We're establishing an agreed framework. I'm sorry, Miss Christine. Establishing an agreed framework. Oh, okay. Okay, so establishing an agreed framework, which we'll be diving into. I'm sorry, that's fine, Miss Christine. Don't worry about it. Then engaging with the lesson. Okay, after we establish an agreed framework, we're going to go through it. Then we're going to be engaging with the lesson. What are the different tools that we'll be using to actually engage with the lesson, with the different components of the lesson, the teacher aspect, the materials, the student aspect as well. Okay, so it's not just looking at what the teacher is doing, it's also really centered in looking at what the students are doing as a result of this. How do we look for learning? Okay, is it just about looking at the notes of the students? What are we noticing in terms of the types of questions the children are asking, how the students are grouped? Okay, is there evidence of learning in the classroom? Can we see that, what the students have been doing? What does the objective say the students should be learning this particular lesson? So really actively looking for learning, not the planning for learning, but the actual learning. Then, what type of observation etiquette should we be exhibiting? What types of things should we be doing before we go in for a lesson observation, during the lesson observation, after the lesson observation? And who are the different stakeholders we need to be engaging at different levels? Okay, communication is so important. Observing the set procedures and protocols for what this should look like. So it's important that everyone knows what their role is to ensure that this happens, and it happens in a way that's sustainable. It also happens in a way where teachers feel comfortable, bringing us into their classroom and sharing those practices, and that we can really capture what's going on. We know sometimes even in something like a job interview, people may get nervous. So we want to make sure that everything we're doing in terms of our etiquette is taking away any form of anxiety that the teachers may have, so we can actually observe what a typical day is like in that classroom. Then how are we planning for feedback? Okay, feedback is not necessarily just at the end. Feedback happens at different levels. Okay, is the feedback timely? Is the feedback concise? Right? So recognizing that we have a teacher or school leader that is probably already nervous that you as an evaluator, or even you as a school leader being in your teacher's classroom, it's a source of anxiety at times. So how are we able to plan for it in a way that doesn't overwhelm the teacher or the school owner, but is still able to get the type of impact we're looking for, okay? I like to make feedback bite-sized, right? Bite-sized means it can fit in your mouth neatly without you having to, So how are we planning for feedback in terms of the intervals, formal and informal?
Okay. I want to also just point out one of the comments that was in the chat that I thought was wonderful in terms of participants stating their objectives. Ms. Onigogi Oluwatoyin wrote that she would like to learn how to make lesson observations more collaborative, less critical, and more focused on impact. And I really think that in this space here, this looking for learning, which we're going to get to in a few slides, is where we can shift this observation mode of being like, I'm going to go through a checklist and tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, to I'm going to support you, and we're going to see your progress through the learning of the students. Now we're going to break the internet right now. We're going to do something we did in the first workshop called a Menti. I'm going to stop my share because I want to know, we would like to know what you typically focus on when you are conducting an observation. Like, what's your priority? So let me swap my share. Hold on, it's going to take me a sec right here. So just bear with me. While I'm getting the Menti up, Mrs. Ashobu, would you like to call on one or two people to share what they would add to this? What would they add to either the rationale for conducting an observation or the steps to carrying out an observation? So Mrs. Ashobu, over to you while I switch screens.
Okay, it actually may also be Ms. Fauzia. So Ms. Fauzia or Ms. Ashobu. Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So while Ms. Christine is sharing her screen, please may I call on Mrs. Adebimpe Savage. Please unmute yourself and let us have your contributions, ma, as to what Ms. Christine just asked.
Good morning. I really didn't get the question. So can you please redirect the question, or let me have a clearer picture of the question, please?
I'll try restating it, and then Ms. Fauzia, if you want to tweak it at all. It's basically to say, what would you add to this? What would you add to either the rationale for conducting an observation based on your experience, or what would you add to the framework, the 5 steps that the DG shared based on your experience?
Mrs. Savage, did you get that, ma? What would you like to add to what the framework that was shown by the DG now? What would you like to add when you want to carry out lesson observations? So let's have your contributions, please.
Can you please flash back to that drawing for me, please?
Okay, so on that board, we had establish an agreed framework, plan for feedback, engage with the lesson, observation etiquette, and looking for learning. So from those steps, what would you like to add to that?
there must be agreed standard on in the class. What should be the standard of the class of what should be acceptable in the class and what is not acceptable? Because while you are doing observation, there must be class rules on what the standards, your standard of rules in the class, so that all learners will know that I can only ask a question on this, or I have a right to this before we start the lesson.
So are you talking about establishing sort of like rules?
Yes,
for
rules, ma.
Okay,
Rules.
establishing rules. So
Yes,
I actually am of the opinion that that's something that the teacher should do with the students beforehand in some way, so that students also don't feel like, remember, we want to get an accurate picture of what actually happens. We want to be invisible in that classroom. But I know that sometimes the teacher may not have the time to do that. So I think establishing routines, procedures, rules overall is a good thing. I'm not sure. I think it's something that can be part of the framework also. So the agreed upon framework, right? So, and it's part of the planning that happens beforehand also. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else? I've tried to type in some of the comments that Miss Christine put in. I typed it in. So if anyone else, thank you so much, Mr. Savage, for that. Anyone else want to comment on the rationale of the framework that hasn't been mentioned that we should, and or anything that should be added or taken away from the framework? Thank you so much for that.
Okay, so I can see.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Okay, do I take one more person or we go on, Miss Christine?
We can take one more person, sure.
All right, so I can see Orenshile Fausat. Please let us have your quick contributions. Unmute yourself, please. Orenshile Fausat. Okay, if Orenshile Fausat is not ready, Abayomi Salau, please. Can you unmute yourself? Abayomi Salau. Okay.
Hello.
All right, please go ahead with your brief, with your contributions, please.
I didn't do any.
Okay, all right. We're just talking about adding to the 5 steps to carrying out lesson observations. If anybody has 1 or 2 things to say, you can also put your comments in the chat box while I hand over back to Miss Christine. Miss Christine, please.
Awesome, thank you. And I did see one comment in the chat box that was really pertinent, which was thinking about the use of resources, human and otherwise, which is so important, right? It's optimizing the resources that you have. And we talked about that a lot, I think, in the past 2 workshops. So we're gonna have our break the internet moment. For those of you who are new to this process, we are going to ask you to share your thoughts on a Menti. Now, I'm going to put the Menti link and the code into the chat, but let me just show you briefly how this goes. I'm going to actually copy the link. Let me put this into the chat here. This is where we get to hear from all of you at scale. Okay.
And this is one of the moments that I actually like to have 2 devices, right? So I can be focusing on the presentation in one and then maybe doing the Menti on another, for some of you that have access to 2, but you can do it on one also.
You can definitely do it on one. People do it on one with us all of the time. I'm just going to demonstrate. So I posted the link into the chat, and I'll just quickly demo here. So click on the link. And now I am in Menti as a participant. So we want you to share, right? There are no right or wrong answers to this. What do you prioritize? What's the most important thing for you when you go into a lesson? What do you want to see from that teacher? Knowing that, of course, it's going to change a little bit, right? Not all lesson observations are the same, of course. Now, I'm not necessarily putting my responses here, but I'll show you how it would generally work. So I'm going to put number 1. What am I looking at most? I put down instruction. Then after that, I might actually be looking at professional responsibilities. And I believe this was one of the things that was brought up in the comment, right? Classroom management, how you organize the students, how they know your expectations, how you know their expectations, that all fits into this general wheelhouse of professional responsibilities. Then maybe after that, I put in planning and preparation. You know, a good plan or a good lesson note doesn't necessarily mean a good lesson, but a bad plan or a bad lesson note, you're probably going to end up with a pretty bad lesson. And that also, of course, connects into the use of resources, human and otherwise. And then maybe I put in the classroom observation and other or not. And then I submit. And what we get are super fun, real-time results of the poll. You know what I love, absolutely love here, DG and Ms. Fauzia, is the fact that there are people who have been in all of these workshops, so they know how to use Menti now, and they're right in there doing it.
Yes, we see we have about 5 responses, including yours. So 4 of our participants have already used the Menti.
So one thing, if let's say in your school environment, and I know I was talking to a head in Lagos just last night, that's their school because of a COVID cluster had to close temporarily, you know, doing a bit of a circuit breaker, and they've gone back online. This is a great tool, not just for bringing up student voice in an online environment, but also seeing how many students are actually engaged. Because if you have a class of, say, 50 or 45 and you see you know, we only have 9 responses, then a few possibilities. Maybe the question was confusing. That's my weakness. I ask confusing questions a lot. Sometimes it's like it's in my brain and what comes out of my mouth, no connection.
That is why it's important for us to plan for some of the questions we intend on asking.
Yes, absolutely, DG. No question about that. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that people have zoned out. Or a third possibility is that they're not comfy with the technology yet. So, you know, you kind of have to figure out which one is it and then adjust.
I want you all to observe how, based on the participants, there's a sort of constant shift in what is made priority. So that's why it's really important for all of us that are here to let our opinion be known so that we can have a better picture and glimpse as to what this cohort, all 200 of us online now, what we all think is most important, because it would be interesting to see how it changes throughout the course of this workshop, or even a few weeks from now, if at all.
It's funny too when you do this with children, I have to say, because children they always have such great insights. And I'm a primary teacher by training. They always look at this and they say, this is the one that's winning. I always say, no, there's no winning or losing. It's just that most people would prioritize planning and preparation. Interesting. While we let a few other people respond, Ms. Fauzia, could you call on someone to share what they marked as their top priority, whichever one it was? Because again, there's no right or wrong with this. It's just, what do you prioritize? What do you see as being super important when you go in to observe a lesson? Oops,
okay.
I'll pop back up in a second.
Okay, so I'll just be calling somebody randomly. So please let us know what you prioritize as when you're conducting your classroom observation. So can I please call on Akinde Martins? Please unmute yourself and let us know what you would prioritize when you're conducting the classroom observation. Could it be the options are planning and preparation, the classroom environment, professional responsibility, instructions, and others. So let us know what you would prioritize. Okay, if Martins is not ready, please, may I call on Alukomodupe? Please unmute yourself and let us know what you would be prioritizing. Alukomodupe. Okay, waiting for your contributions here. Akodu Kamaruddin. Mr. Akodu, please, can you unmute yourself? Let us know what you would be prioritizing during classroom observation. You can also type your comments in the chat box if you're having difficulty unmuting yourself. Okay, Mr. Akodu, please let us have your contribution.
Someone mentioned that it's difficult to unmute, so it's good for us, Fauzia, if you call on someone, if you can just make sure that you assist them by unmuting them, maybe that would increase the participation.
Okay, Mr. Akodo.
Good morning. Okay. Yeah, I will first of all focus on learner participation. I want to see the responses of the learners to the teacher's presentation. I want to see if the learners are actually flowing with the presentation of the teacher, if learners' interest has been aroused, if the teacher allows learner to respond, and if there is feedback eventually. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kodu, that sounds really good. Where would you put, if you had to choose one of these 5 buckets to put your comments in, that's even if one takes them all, where do you think that would fall in? Would it fall in planning and preparation, the classroom environment, professional responsibilities, instruction, or other?
It will fall under professional responsibilities.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to leave this open for people to continue to add their comment or to add their views. We had 20 out of 220 some participate. We're going to go back to Menti a few times, the total of 3 times during this workshop. So what we find
that's about 10% participation rate for now.
It'll go up. We know it'll go up. We
well
are
done.
Confident.
Well done.
Yes, if you are one of those 20 people, raise your hand and pat yourself on the back. Okay, we're going to jump back to this. Oh, I had switched into annotate mode. Let's lose that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just briefly talk about this and then turn it over to the DG to talk about a framework that she really likes. But one thing that you might want to do when you're going into a school, if you're the evaluator, right? If you're coming in as the external evaluator and observing, is to really understand what's the school's development plan? What are they focused on? What's been recent professional development that the teachers have attended or participated in? Because you can't focus on everything, right, when you go into a lesson. And so agreeing perhaps with the principal, or if you are the principal, agreeing with the teachers, what are the things that we want to prioritize right now? Maybe we've been doing PD on assessment for learning. So where do you see that in the classroom? So that there's really 1 or 2 main areas of focus outside of the non-negotiables like health and safety. So before I share this video, DJ, would you mind talking a little bit? This is just one framework. It's one of many, but it's a beautiful framework. Would you mind talking for a moment about the Danielson Framework and why you love it? Because I know you do.
Okay, so, there are different frameworks that we've all come across, I'm sure, over our course of being educators. Okay, I am a classroom teacher, so I've also seen different things work. And the Charlotte Danielson Framework, I discovered it maybe about 7 or 8 years in one of my former roles, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I've given different presentations and training on this framework. And why do I love it so much? I really like this framework because it is really something that anyone can use. It can be as in-depth or as simple as you need it to be. And it's detailed enough to help teachers themselves be able to gauge where they are as they go about their teaching. Another thing I like about this framework is that it focuses, obviously, it's a teacher, it's based on the teacher itself. So it's not just a framework that we use to evaluate the whole school, but it focuses and zoom ins on the teaching and learning that we all love so much, okay? So this particular framework is split into 4. And you can see, you probably didn't know, but the results of the Menti were split into the 4 also, okay? And I'm going to share that with you. I have the book here. I've had it for years, and it's called The Handbook for Enhancing Professional Practice Using the Framework for Teaching in Your School by Charlotte Danielson. So as you can see, I'm bringing all my goodies out today for you here, okay? So the focus is on 4 main buckets or components. So professional responsibilities. Ms. Christine talked about classroom management. In addition to that, how the teachers going about professional development. Are they improving as a professional? Are they reaching out to parents? Are they reaching out maybe if you're a primary 4 teacher and maybe you have the child in primary, someone else have the child in primary 3. Are you engaging with that primary 3 teacher to have a better glimpse of your students? So it's the different things that a teacher does to professionally enhance their practice, okay? Then we have instruction. Instruction is the real core of teaching and learning, because it's primarily where the student-focused part comes in. So how is the teacher asking questions? How is the teacher grouping the students, right? Everything that happens within that course for how they're instructing, how they're actually teaching, how do they engage students? What do we hear when we go into the classroom of a teacher that is highly effective? Is it just the teacher just talking? Do we hear a pleasant buzz of students talking and asking challenging questions? Okay, then we have classroom environment. So how has the environment been tailored for the needs of the students? Are there groups? How are the groups chosen? Is there evidence of student work in the classroom? Is there, library, whatever it is? How is the classroom environment? And then the last one, I believe I'm missing one. Ms. Christine, which one am I missing?
I can skip ahead.
Yes. No, you can even go back to the Menti.
Professional responsibilities, classroom environment,
planning and preparation. Sorry, yes, that's number 1. Planning and preparation. So not just your lesson plan. How are you anticipating that maybe Anu and Bosse are going to be talking a lot for this particular lesson, so they need to be separated, right? So how are you planning that even in your lesson notes? right? Based on all of this information you have, how are you preparing? How are you planning? So I'm not going to go too deeply. We're still going to go deeper into it later, but let's see what Ms. Charlotte Danielson has to say.
Okay, wonderful. Now, Ms. DG, if you could just give me the thumbs up if you can hear once we start.
Yes. Okay, once we can.
Good grammar and spelling are
Can you hear?
important. But if you want to write essays that inspire, messages that forge brighter connections,
so what is good teaching?
Sorry, we
Let's
can't
look at
see
our
her.
first section. About.
Can we pause it? We
if
can't
can
see
generate
it, but we
some
can hear.
ideas.
You could walk into a classroom, right?
Oh, I know why. Okay. Hold on. Sorry, give me 1 sec.
No problem.
In writing the framework, I collected together people.
I love that line, by the way, while I go back. If I had a child this age, I'd want them in this classroom. Questions that's useful.
That you see or hear there that would convince you that you're in the presence of an expert teacher. That is, what would make you think, if I had a child this age, I'd want them in this room. In writing the framework, I collected together people's ideas into several big domains.
The framework for teaching consists of 4 domains. Domain 1, planning and preparation. Domain 2, the classroom environment. Domain 3, instruction. And Domain 4, professional responsibilities. The framework for teaching is composed of 22 components within these 4 domains. Each component describes an important aspect of teaching, and taken together, the components capture everything important about that domain. Teaching at each component is further defined by 4 levels of performance. These levels of teaching performance are described in rubrics, which provide educators with a roadmap for how they can improve their teaching.
The framework for teaching is used to definitely enhance my lessons. The rubric allows me to pick what will be used to reach the goals for the children, to enhance myself.
Every component in it is grounded in solid research, and it's also been validated. And what that means is that when teachers' performance is assessed on the components of the framework, those whose performance is rated at a high level, their students learn more than the students of teachers who perform at a lower level. That is, high performance in teaching predicts high levels of learning with students. So teachers can be confident that when they are evaluated using it, they are being evaluated on the important aspects of teaching.
It generates both equity and clarity for teacher performance. There is a common understanding of proficient practice and a common understanding that teaching is both a sum of all its parts, as well as a very detailed but very subtle practice.
I'm sorry, Ms. Christine, the video has paused, but I'm hearing it. Is there a way in which we can quickly address that?
When you look at
Okay, it's back to normal.
Barry, I'm on mute. What we could do is, this will
No,
be...
I think it's back to normal now.
Is it?
I heard
Oh, okay.
Yes, I said when you look out. Yes, I heard that.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Let me know.
traffic. So if you see traffic,
Right? In the voice of a 5-year-old, not of a senior, looking back on the experience. Now,
The framework for teaching is a generic instrument. There's not a different one for middle school science and high school English and kindergarten, right? It's one framework. The framework for teaching is not a checklist of specific behaviors. It can't be, because the behaviors themselves are different. But the ideas underlying what you observe are the same. The underlying structure is the same, and that's what's important for people to understand.
Okay, I'm going to pause this here. I think what what Danielson's saying that's really important for us to keep in mind is that principles of effective teaching and learning, whether that's the professional responsibilities or effective instruction, are really consistent regardless of the age of the students. It may look different, right? You might have objectives shown as pictures on a board versus having them written on the board in great detail. But I'm going to stop the video now. What I encourage you to do is to go to lagoslearnstogether.com, and I did put this in the chat, and you can access the full video through the deck that is under PD with the DG.
As you are watching the video, I want you to really think through how some of the things we saw could be different in our context. Okay, what challenges may we face? Just based on that video, we're still going to dig deeper. We know that in the video they mentioned that the framework is a generic one and really could be used. But based on just what we saw, how do you think it may play out differently? What challenges, what opportunities for growth do you think would be embedded with this framework? In other words, what are your reservations about it based on what you've seen? What do you think about it so far? And you can indicate that in the chat. Please indicate that in the chat. So I think, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was actually going to ask you, I think one of the things that you shared that's so important is that observing a lesson is not just about going through and check marking things. You really need to be engaged with the lesson. So could you speak a little bit about how an evaluator or even a school leader might engage with a lesson without disturbing the flow of the lesson? On the next slide, we'll discuss a controversy about that, but this is really about, from a mindset standpoint, what might the evaluator be doing?
Okay, so obviously we know that based on I have all my instruments here that my people know and recognize, right? We all are using this. We're not going away from this. We're adding to this, okay? Please keep that in mind. So there are many things that happen beforehand, informing the school ahead of time, especially when we're going for a whole school evaluation. But when you are focusing on the teaching and learning, right? What types of things should we be doing to engage with the lesson? The first thing we've noticed here is that we want to make sure, and some of the participants have indicated this in the chat, that they don't really want to be seen in the classroom. They don't want to disturb the lesson. I believe I don't know if it's Mrs. Onibogi that mentioned, feedback should be given at the end so that you don't disturb the students. Absolutely, right? But what does that look like? What does that look like step by step? Okay, so one of the first things, we want to be able to acknowledge the teacher. So you don't even have to say anything, right? Don't even maybe just a nod, eye contact, and then just find a place to sit where you could spend time discovering what the intentions of the lesson are. This could be you taking notes. This could be you taking pictures. It could be you recording part of the conversation and really thinking about, as a stranger into that classroom, what are the students trying to learn? What are the students trying to learn, and how, in what ways is the teacher optimizing that time in class? Okay. Another thing that you want to do is you want to remember that the main thing we're there for is learning, right? We want to move away from the checklist. Checklist gets us started. It's the minimum standards as indicated in the National Education Quality Assurance Handbook, but we are supposed to bring life to that, okay? So we're not just going in and say, okay, do we have this check? Do we have this? And everything that's it? No, that is minimal. All of those things are expected, but what else? Okay, so we know that learning is not yes or no. Learning exists within a certain classroom on different levels. How well? Okay, not is learning taking place, how well is learning taking place? I must emphasize that. That is the point of the observations that we're doing. Is every student in the room learning something new? Of course, we know that when we go into a classroom, it's just a snapshot. So what they've learned yesterday, we may not see. What they're learning tomorrow, we also may not see. But based on this snapshot, think of you just taking a picture. Based on this snapshot of this classroom, how do we know that in some way, shape, or form, every student is learning something new, okay? It can be knowledge, it can be skills, it can be competencies. It can even be something as simple as procedures, right? How do we even come into class? Is everyone just coming in, especially when you have a primary school classroom, or is there a system? Do we notice that students know where they're sitting? Do we notice that when they want to distribute handouts, it's a systematic way of doing it? The teacher, it's seamlessly happening. That is by design. Okay, that doesn't happen in every person's classroom. So it's important to observe what is going on at the learner end and what that is indicative of at the teacher end. Okay, of course, if it's possible, you can talk to the teacher to gain some clarification when you can, but do not interrupt the flow of the lesson. That is not what we're there for. We're not there to police. We want to get a picture, a snapshot of how teaching and learning is going on, and we want to be able to do that accurately. Next slide.
I was on mute. Now we're going to have a controversy, and it does tie into a question that Abayomi Osokomaya added, which in engaging with the lesson, is it not better that the teacher introduces the stranger a new person in the class and the purpose of his or her presence in the class? So my own personal view is that yes, the children should know who is there and why. And that's kind of to be honest, that's something of a child protection and safeguarding issue. We want children to know when there are adults that it's right to question who they are and what they're doing there. This was especially true in online lessons. If you have a stranger or a new person show up in that online lesson, they should be introduced. So it's part of e-safety. So absolute agreement with that. Now, this is the controversy. Do we or don't we talk with the students during the class? Now, these are a series of recommendations. We won't read them off about what kinds of questions you might ask a student, because who better to understand what they've learned than the student themselves? But could this interrupt the lesson? Is it always a good idea? I know that DG circulated these slides in advance and had people with different views on this. So we're going to introduce as well right now a thinking routine called tug of war. Now, we all know how a tug of war works in real life. We have two teams on opposite sides of a rope, each pulling at it. But we can also have a tug of war when it comes to opinions. There's no right or wrong answer to this, but there are very good arguments on both sides. So we're going to move back over to the Menti.
I also just wanted to mention, Ms. Christine, that talking to students is very much embedded in the instrument that we use, and our officers do find time to speak to students, get students' opinion about what is going on in the school in general. We have a lot of evaluators on the line, and I think it would be very helpful, especially for school leaders, to hear directly from our evaluators about what they think about this and how they go about doing the evaluation and what role the student plays in all of that.
Okay, amazing. Let's jump onto the Menti. I want to make sure we have some Menti responses here. Now we've got 3 statements, right? We should speak with the students in all lesson observations to ensure we hear their understanding of what they've learned.
Is it being shared? I'm sorry. I don't see.
No, it's me. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Forgive my Zoom fail. Here we go. All right. So the other option is we should speak with students in some lessons, such as science labs, perhaps things that are more interactive. And then the third option is we should avoid speaking with the students. Now, this is just during the lesson we're talking about here to ensure that there is no interruption to the flow of the lesson. What is your opinion on this? And I'll share the link again to the chat. Oh, thank you, Ms. Fauzia. You did the same. I'm putting my own opinion, but again, we all have different, and my context is different too. So very simple to do. Hopefully we have a few responses already. Oh no, just mine. DG, would you want to reiterate the instructions in case I've been unclear? I know, oh good, we've got another response.
The instructions in terms of participation?
On the Menti, or what's being asked of people.
Okay, so basically we have 3 statements here, and we want you to use the Menti tool. I believe you can access it on the chat box. To what extent? Do you strongly disagree, strongly agree? We should speak with the students in all lesson observations to ensure we hear their understanding. The second is we should speak with students in some lessons, such as science lab. It could be whatever course we think, but some, not all. The third is we should avoid speaking with the students to ensure that there is no interruption to the flow of the lesson. Generally speaking, where do we fall? Strongly agree with each or strongly disagree? And that's for each statement. Right now, it looks like we have about 8 participants. It's
and
interesting
while you're
to see
doing
the difference.
It is. And yeah, no, I think as we've said, there's no right or wrong to this. Miss Fauzia, would you mind calling on someone to share their views on this topic while we wait for more responses? To speak with the students or not to speak with the students, or to decide when to speak with the students.
Very well. As we keep as we use Menti, I would like to randomly call on somebody, one of the participants, to give his opinion whether to speak or not to speak to students during lesson observation. And if you are interested, you can also use the raise hand button so that I can just unmute you. But in the meantime, I'll call on Mrs. Oguntola Rebecca Wayemisi. Oguntola Rebecca, please let us know, what do you think? Would you speak or not speak with students during lesson observation? Okay, if Mrs. Oguntola is not ready, Mr. Awobiowo Adeyemi.
Hello.
Can you please?
Yes, hello.
Good morning, sir.
I want to strongly agree that we shouldn't speak during the lesson. We should wait after the lesson, because there might be some kind of interruptions in one. Then apart from the interruptions that we talk about to probably to affect the flow of the lesson, there could equally be a kind of scenes being created between the evaluator as well as mentees, as well and the teachers. So there might be problem here in argument that this is how you should do it, this is how you're supposed to do it. So, but after the lesson, they will come together and then agree on terms. So, but during the lesson, it's always very, very good to avoid speaking with the students in order to avoid the interruptions. That is my stand.
Okay, very well. Thank you for your contributions. We have somebody from Less Plus Schools. Less Plus Schools. Please, can you give us your contributions? Can you unmute yourself and let us know what to think about lesson of?
Okay, hello, good morning. My name is Olufolake Aremu from Lespoa Cradle Schools. I believe that there should the evaluator should be able to interact with the pupils during lesson in order to know if the pupils are really learning. And I believe that in the process of doing that, you are not going to interrupt the class, because you would look for a time of interaction. Sit beside the pupil and just ask quietly, okay, what do you think you're learning? Are you enjoying what you're learning? It has happened to me. I was in a class of classroom observation, and the teacher had given the children a reading book, and then I asked one of the children, are you enjoying the book? And she said, no. And that I was able to correct that, and that saved the day for the child. Otherwise, there won't have been any learning going on in the class. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I'm just going to read one or two from the chat box too. Somebody in the chat room said, if a learner is not doing the right thing during a lesson, the teacher's duty is bound to speak to such a learner rather than wait till the end of the lesson. So that's a comment from I think Ola.
Another thing I also wanted to mention is that we should remember why we are there, right? We as a school leader, you should remember why you are conducting a classroom observation at school-based level, right? If it's just to capture what is going on, there are many things you'll see, but you want the feedback to be systematic in nature. In other words, even if I fix what's going on in the lesson for the time I'm there, I'm not going to be there every day. So how do I capture, just like when you do student assessment, right? Let's compare this to looking at our student work. We can explain it to the child and have them change their answer. But what does that mean for the next time they encounter such problems? Maybe at a higher level or lower level. Will they have the tools to self-adjust? So in as much as, we're there and we can make some changes, we need to recognize that the return on investment on being an observer in a class absolutely has to do with having a systematic approach. in other words, not just doing things for short-term gratification. Okay, so we're noticing that the teacher is struggling with classroom management. If we're noticing the teacher is struggling with objectives, right? Unless it's an emergency situation, like the children are so rowdy and you need to intervene, it's best to capture what is going on in that classroom, so that when you go back in terms of the feedback you're giving to the teacher and to the school, the adjustments can be made systematically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think that the responses that we're seeing really speak to the nature of this, right? You don't want to change the course of that lesson, as the DG said, but at the same time, there are insights that you can get when you are speaking with students. So if there's an appropriate time to ask the students certain questions about their learning, for example, then you can do that, right? Where it's not going to cause a distraction. If, for example, the students are working in groups, having a quiet conversation with the student is a great way of collecting data. But then there are other times where you can't do it. So this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we can see from this tug of war, you're somewhere in the middle, but certainly not through any shortage of strong opinions on one side or the other. Let me jump back to the presentation. So the next thing that we want to talk about is looking for learning, right? It's very easy to go in and mark down, I saw the teacher share their objectives. I saw the teacher accurately deliver content. But how do you actually see learning in the classroom? If all you're seeing is a teacher talking, you're not actually seeing students learn. So DG, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk for a moment, and then we'll ask the participants to share in the chat. What do you see as evidence of learning?
Thank you, Ms. Christine, and thank you for our participants. We jumped up to about, I think, 35 participants in the Menti, and that doesn't even include people that were participating in the chat box. So well done. I really like that immediate feedback, because we instantly know that we're not on the same page, and it's sometimes it's good to agree to disagree, and it helps us as policymakers and those doing lesson observations to really think through the why. Why is there not, one set approach when it comes to this? Do we need to consider other approaches? Okay, that's what feedback is there for, to show you a picture of where we all are as we provide, education to our learners. Okay, so I really like this topic, looking for learning. We know that, learning, just like teaching, sometimes it's not as tangible to capture, right? When we think of the measures of student learning, how do you know students have learned? Is it just their assessment? What takes place? What takes place in the classroom? How does it take place? And how are we able to capture that to figure out to what extent learning has happened? I would say learning does happen, but to what extent? Remember, we are focused on progress and improvement, okay? So it often happens when we watch, when we imitate, and when we adapt to what we see. And thinking is invisible, right? You can't really see a lot of the processes that our students go through, where they're thinking through the content, where they're thinking through a math, problem. Oftentimes, a child will go through it over and over, and then it just clicks. it doesn't mean that when it clicks, that's when the learning took place. The learning has been taking place over a continuum of time. And how are we able to capture that, right? How are we able to capture that? And we know that some people are more vocal than others. Likewise, some students are more vocal than others. So what systems are in place to gather feedback on how students are learning, if learning is taking place and to what extent? And it is something that is challenging. It'll look different, even classrooms within the same school. In fact, even lessons done by the same teacher, the teacher that did the lesson at 8 a.m., the same teacher that does the same lesson at 10 a.m. may be different for a variety of reasons, okay? So we need to have that individualized approach, and we have to have a very open mind, flexible mind as we're looking for clues. One thing is to have an open mind. Another thing is we need to actively be focused on capturing accurate information. So that means putting down exactly what is being done without judgment. Okay, I'll say that again. Putting down or capturing what is being done without judgment. We are all human beings and we bring our subjectivity to the table. How can we capture evidence in a way where we're able to do so objectively, okay? We need to look out for the types of questions that are being asked. What level are the different questions that are being asked? Is it appropriate for the lesson that is being taught? What type of explanations are the students giving to one another? Are they allowed to give explanations to one another? What about the explanations that the teachers also giving to the students? Is it proficient? Does it serve the purpose? Is the teacher just giving the student the answer, or is the teacher giving the student opportunity to get to that learning on their own? Remember, we want students to be able to do things with or without us at the end of the day, okay? So what is the type of relationship that the students have with one another? What type of relationship do they have with the teacher? You know, is it cold? Is it warm? Is it engaging? Is it challenging? Okay. And are they actually motivated to learn? Or are they just doing it to just fulfill all righteousness? Are they just doing it to do its sake? So what has gone on before that time to ensure that students are motivated to learn? Of course, we're not saying that every single student will exhibit this in the same way. Absolutely not. But as we continue to grab different forms of evidences, we're able to come to better conclusions. What type of resources are being used? Okay, is it just, and so I want to say not just what type of resources are being used, but how are resources being used? Sometimes we can use traditional resources in a new way, okay? So how are resources being used and optimized? We know that not every classroom has access to technology, but even with your manual processes, how are you optimizing your existent resources? Okay, and how do they support learning? Are the tasks well designed so that students are being appropriately challenged and supported? We know that we have students at different levels. How has it been planned that different students will be able to access the same material but at different access points? And I know oftentimes it does have to do with your level of resources that the school may have access to, but how can we leverage? We're always talking about being able to prioritize. We know that we can't get everything every time, okay? But with the existent resources you have, how are we able to support student learning as well as challenge them? Then will the lesson allow students to continue to make progress, over time beyond the lesson being observed? Do students still have questions? Do they have questions that drive them to even do things that you didn't even send them to do outside of the classroom? So with this, as we look for learning, it's very broad, and the supplement that the draft supplement that we've created is really trying to get more forms of evidence inside this very big toolbox that we have to see that indeed learning has taken place. Next slide.
I think we talked a little bit about the domains, but let's leave this up for a moment. And what we'd like you to do is use the chat to add on to what the DG shared. What are examples, like physical examples of learning that you might be able to see in the classroom? What would be evidence of learning? What would you be looking for? And you can use the chat for that. We'll just spend about 2 minutes here. We'd like to see some great practical examples in the chat.
Fazia, can you please just look through the comments and share some of the contributions?
Yes, ma'am. I'm on it, ma'am. So we are still expecting responses from our participants. So we are looking at adding to this 4 domains. No introductions for now, just comments on what other physical examples that you can add.
So I'll throw one in there, right? I love when I'm in a class, just looking at a student's exercise book, if they're working in one, and seeing the types of responses that are in the exercise book. So that's an example of learning that's visible. A student answering a question is learning that's visible. But again, it's only one student who's learning we're actually seeing at that moment. On the other hand, if the teacher asks each student to turn to the student next to them and share their response, then you might see visible learning on the part of the whole class. Any other thoughts you would add to that? Okay, great. So the quality of responses.
We have somebody saying in the chat box that the teaching methods adopted must be what the learners can easily relate with. Somebody also said that learning has taken place when the well, I didn't get that, but learning has taken place when the number of learners can respond positively to the teacher's questions. So these are some of the comments that we are getting, some of the responses that we are getting. So somebody else, Mr. Shegun Ogunyemi, has added to the contributions. He says direct evidence measures students' learning by examining student work and performance directly. These are some of the comments that we are getting.
Okay, great. These are wonderful contributions. We are, as always, starting to run a little bit short on time, as always. I think we've actually had an opportunity, thanks to your comments, to really talk about the observation etiquette in many ways. There's just one thing that I'll highlight. What is the one thing, and you can put this in the chat, the one thing that you could do that would be really, really poor observation etiquette? The one thing you can do that you should never do when you're observing a teacher. And I'll give you a hint. This was not something we had to worry about 20 years ago. What's the one thing you should never, ever do?
Okay. Please let us have your comments or contributions in the chat box. And I might be also randomly calling our participants. Please let us know what you would never do during your observation. So we are now in the segment of observation etiquette. What would you not do when you are observing lessons? Please let us have your contributions.
So our evaluators, what will you not do? What should you never do? And this may be multiple. I know Miss Christine mentioned the one thing, maybe the one thing for you. Okay.
No, I mean, this is like the one thing I think you can do that would break the trust of being there and fully present, that would not acknowledge the teacher, right?
You're giving many hints.
I've given a lot of hints. And the big thing is 20 years ago, 2001, we probably wouldn't have had to worry about this.
I have some hands raised up. Maybe I should allow one or two participants to give their contributions verbally. Mr.
Oh, we've got some. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry.
The comments are coming in when it comes to fixing.
I love these. I'm 100% with almost all of them, with the exception of one, but that might just be a me thing. But still, nobody has said the one thing that I think is the worst, like the worst thing that you could do. But actually, some of these are pretty bad. They might be tied. So don't correct the teacher. That's true. Okay. Okay. So maybe I'm thinking of the second worst thing then. But let's think. 20 years ago, we wouldn't have had to worry about this. Okay? It's a now thing. Criticize the teacher. With you. But one thing that would be really bad, and it's hard not to do. You might feel buzzing. You might hear
She's
things.
giving you the answers.
I'm giving you hints. Okay, all of these are great. All of these are fantastic. DG, can you help me here?
Okay, let's hope I'm right too. For me, it really goes with being present and being there. And it would be not scrolling on your phone, not being on your phone.
Gold stars.
Not being on your phone while you're doing the lesson observation.
It's in your pocket,
and
your handbag.
I think, Christine, though, I think in all fairness, we also have to think through the role that the phone may play in terms of the materials, right? Because if the lesson observer may have the tool on their phone, or if they're using technology to do the lesson observation, right? So if you're using technology, it should only be for that purpose. And the teacher should know that that's what is being used for. The teacher should know.
That's the key, because yes, I mean, we actually, when we are doing observations, I'll even go in with my computer sometimes to take notes. but I will tell the teacher what I'm doing in advance. Same as if I'm in a meeting and I don't have a notebook with me, I might take notes on my phone, but I always say to whoever I'm meeting with, I'm just taking notes on my phone, because you don't want them to think for a minute that a phone call that's coming in, or, you know, and I'm saying this honestly, hand on heart, I am saying this because it is a temptation for me when I'm in an observation and I feel my phone pinging away, or, and I've seen other people do it. You know, your boss calls and you quietly answer like this. Try not to do that.
Yes, and
Okay,
I think it goes with professional, how professional we're being with this role. Okay, so in being professional, you want to absolutely have, you know, you want to have things established. So even if the teacher is aware ahead of time that, you know, I'm only using my phone for this purpose, then fine, but try as much as possible to not use your phone for any other thing than for the lesson observation. Because, you know, when you're in a teacher's classroom, it is their territory, and we are visitors, we are guests there, but we want it to seem like we're not there. So if we want it to seem like that, still, we need to carry them along, and we need to observe best practices for professionalism when we are conducting a lesson observation.
Absolutely. Thank you, DG. We have one last thing to do. I know we're 2 minutes over time, which I think is still a form of progress. We're going to use one last thinking routine. And this is one of my
Miss
favorites.
Christine, I'm sorry, before we go here, I know we're tying up, but can we just go back to the framework? Because I know we didn't speak on it formally.
Yes.
With the 4 domains.
Yes. Hold on. Let me switch my share. There we are.
Okay. So look at this. Look at this framework. Look at the overarching title for each one: planning and prep, classroom environment, instruction, professional responsibilities. And just go through, just look at them. I'm not really going to speak on this, but I want you to see how loaded each one is. So for instance, class domain 2 is not just about the physical space. It's not just about the physical space. Number 1 is not just about a lesson plan. Number 4 is not just about professional development. And number 3 is not just about engaging students in learning. What I want you to do in your notepad is, for each one, note down what speaks to you most, or what surprised you most about each domain. I know we're over time, but that's all I'll say about that. So for the next 1 minute, what surprises you most about each domain, and or what do you think is most important for each domain? But I always like to focus on what surprised you most about each domain. Okay, I think we can move on. And you can choose to include it in the chat box. What, not the domain itself, but what about each domain surprised you most? So what in 4 surprised you most, in 2, in 1, in 3, and so on. We can move on to the mentee, Miss Christine.
Okay. Now, all of this is available on legoslearnstogether.com under the tab PD with the DG. Now, we're just going to wrap up with one last mentee. And in fact, this mentee can be informed by what the DG just asked you to do. I used to think, now I think. I used to think a classroom observation was about watching the teacher. Now I think it's about finding evidence of student learning. That's one example of a way your thinking might have changed. I used to think that a classroom observation should focus on a checklist. Now I think a classroom observation should focus on teaching practices identified in the school development plan. These are just two examples, so you're going to share them on the Menti. And we'll wrap with this. I am going to copy the link and pop it into the chat again. For those of you who work in schools also, I used to think, and now I think, is a wonderful plenary for showing evidence of student learning in a single lesson. What did you come in thinking? What do you think now? But it's what we would like you to use as your plenary for this workshop. Don't forget to add your name and your district.
As we think through what we used to think, they could be as broad or as specific as we need them to be.
I know with this exercise, I have a tendency to get nervous when I don't see people respond. And if it's the first time you're doing it, it can feel a little, will I get this right? Will I get this wrong? It's not that kind of thing. I also know it does take some time to organize your thoughts, but let's see if we can get at least a few up here. Okay, I'm going to stop the share on this until we have a response or two. Perhaps either Ms. Bazia or Mrs. Ashobo, you could call on somebody to close the workshop with how their thinking changed as a result of the workshop.
Okay, very well, Ms. Christine.
Thank you.
Now it's time for us to get contributions from our participants. I'll be calling somebody randomly to give us how your thinking has changed regarding today's workshop. Randomly, I'll be calling on Mr. Anthony Sada. If you could tell us what has changed. Mr. Anthony Sada, please unmute yourself and let us have your contributions. I see a few hands raised also. If Mr. Tony is not Mr. Babajide Adedini, I can see your hand raised. Please, can we have your contribution as to what has changed based on this workshop? I used to think, now I think. Okay, I have Mrs. Onigbogi Stella too. Please unmute yourself and let us have your contributions. Mrs. Stella Onigbogi, Mr. Adedini. Okay. Mrs. Stella, ma.
Good morning.
Good morning, ma.
Hello.
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 Mr. Adedini, can you give us a few seconds, please?
Hello.
Let me. Mr. Adedini.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah. As regards the etiquette during the observation, it has been clearly stated that interruption during lesson is highly prohibited. As a speaker in the school, in the first case as an evaluator, as an evaluator, hello, you just have to observe the lesson and at the end of the whole thing, you can meet with the teacher and let the person know things about what you observed about him or her. Those are the things I think has been established during this webinar. Thank you.
Wow, look, thank you so much for that response. Look at what we're getting online. Someone said, I used to think it was to reinforce more variables in my lesson observation. Another person said, classroom observation is looking at the holistic view of teaching and learning. It is for improvement and not to victimize a teacher or colleague. Everyone benefits from the school community. Now someone else said, yes, I used to think that learning takes place in the classroom only. Before now, oops, it moved. This thing is too quick for me. At first, I thought it was good to use abusive language on my staff and learners. Now I know better and I will endeavor to speak right to them. Fantastic. I used to think monitoring is only on physical observation. Now my thinking has broadened. Amazing. So see how useful Menti can be and how many different ways, right? In this particular way, we're able to actually get the actual feedback from people as opposed to just choosing like multiple choice.
Wonderful. Well, DG, we are about 15 minutes over, and I would love to thank everyone for their patience. 194 people who stayed for an extra 15 minutes, and I love the depth of the responses on the Menti. DG,
good job, everyone. I want to thank everyone who's been here today. I believe we reached about 260 participants starting, which is amazing that you're able to take out of your time, take out of your pocket, right? We know that data over here is not free. So it really shows that you're investing into yourself. And that's one thing I really want you to take away, that you're investing into yourselves as professionals. You're investing into your school. And at the end of the day, it's really, really for better learning experiences and learner outcomes. All the work that we're doing is really for the benefit of our students and, of course, our teachers. I want to thank you for all of the participation, and we're looking forward to additional sessions with you. This is the third in the series, and I know that we're progressively at the back end getting better at meeting the needs of our participants. Please, if there's any feedback, anything that's needed, I think we should also consider having a feedback form for each session. So I'm not really sure how we'll go about if it will be on Lagos Learns, but we'll let you know during the next session what that would be like. So we can also get feedback on some of the things that you are saying to us and capture them. I want to thank you all. God bless you all as you go about your day and your week. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Please remember that for those of you who are probably in and out, or for those of you who have friends that wanted to join, everything is going to be available on YouTube at OEQA Lagos and on our LagosLearnsTogether.com website under PD with the DG. See how that has a good ring to it. Anyone who can tell me the literary device we're using will get a thumbs up from me. Okay, so I believe that's it. Thank you so much. We're over time. We'll try to get better next time. Thank you so much, and God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.